Are you ready? Okay. I didn't see the thing. I didn't see the video run. I guess so. So let's open in a word of prayer. Sorry for the delay there. Lord, thank you for this day. We pray that you'll bless our time together as we talk about some pretty heavy topics, and pray that you'll always help us to keep in mind that you are in control, and that we are looking forward to the return of Jesus, Yeshua, Moshiach, who will come and set up a kingdom where righteousness will prevail. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. Well, I'm going to call this one, and part of this was just, I pick some of these up sometimes from things that I'm reading, and this one came from an article I was reading in The Guardian in the UK about the weather. As you may have noticed, the weather has been rather extreme this week. We had heat indexes well over 100 here for a couple days, and then yesterday morning I went out to play golf early, and it was 50 degrees, literally 50 degrees cooler in the way it felt than it had been just 2 days before. So it's just this up and down thing that's crazy, but there's a lot of other things, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So here's just some of the channels that we're on. We talk each week about the, and by the way, on these channels, if you would like and subscribe the video, it sometimes helps the algorithms when people go searching for it. We constantly get told by people that they've subscribed and been unsubscribed by YouTube 5 times in very short order. And I sort of get the impression sometimes that they don't really like what we talk about. So you can try Rumble, Real FBC, Brighteon, Fellowship Bible Chapel, and the Truth Network. We talk about the convergence of events and all of these things that seem to be speeding up. And this is to remind you of my grid that I look through. Some of the things I look for is we know things will accelerate. We know things will be converging. We also know that there's a logistics aspect to Bible prophecy. For example, there's a lot of discussion about whether Babylon will be rebuilt in Iraq. And so if that's going to happen, there has to be a big city, commercial city built. Now, a lot of that changes too, because now we have work from home, so maybe that has an impact on what this final Babylon will look like. I don't know. And then understanding, which we get from Daniel chapter 12 and some other passages, about the fact that at the time of the end, there will be wise. The wise will understand, but the wicked will never understand. And that's part of that is because of a judgment that takes place on them. If I could just read briefly from Romans chapter 1, because I think we'll see some of this in play this week. For the wrath of God is revealed from Romans 1:18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because though they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason God gave them up to vile passions, for even their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another, men with men committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error, which was due. And even though they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness. Full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness, they are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. And boy, it sounds like Paul's watching the evening news about what's going on. Similarly, there's also the passage we refer to sometimes over in 2 Timothy chapter 3. But know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. And from such people turn away. Also in 2 Timothy chapter 4, it says, preach the word, be ready in and out of season, convince, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and teaching. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. But you be watchful in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of evangelists, fulfill your ministry. And we also remember that great passage in Acts chapter 17 where Paul goes to Mars Hill in Athens, and he confronts the people there, that they're worshiping, they have a god, a statue, an idol to the unknown God. And Paul doesn't come across as this nice, sweet, seeker-sensitive type guy in that conversation. And there's a lot of misrepresentation of what occurred on Mars Hill in Athens with Paul when he confronted the Athenians. And he was very direct to them. I see you worship this unknown God. But now he said, this God has come in the form of Jesus Christ and is saving us from our sins. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And what did he say? It wasn't kind, it wasn't nice, but it was truthful. You have to be truthful when you speak to people. He said, the times of ignorance are now over. Now, that's not a very kind thing to say, I don't think. And I see this back and forth, particularly when you're reading through these lists, haughty, proud, all these things. It's like, was Paul prophesying that social media was going to come on the scene in the last days where all these arguments would take place? And it's, I watch them. I try not to participate too much. But, you'll see somebody like, I believe this about eschatology, and this is how it's all going to work out. And then someone will say, well, I have a different take on it. And then immediately they're in an argument like, you're a first grader, you're an idiot, you can't even read the Bible, and back and forth. And the other will return it in kind, and then both will go away saying, boy, those guys that believe that way, they're just so mean and nasty to everybody. But we're nice to everybody, and it's not the case. And I read both sides of a lot of arguments, and I see this. So we're living at this time where you're going to see, I think, the foreshadows of things that are coming. I don't think we're at this stage yet where the horsemen are starting to ride. The horsemen talked about in Revelation chapter 6, and also I think alluded to in the Olivet Discourse by Jesus in talking about the birth pangs in Matthew chapter 24. But certainly we're seeing the effects. So I'm going to go through, and this is, I think, this is I love this picture. I think it could actually be more complex to show how, even in this great orchestra, everything harmonizes and fits together, and that's the way Scripture is going to be. And just a reminder, the Scripture that we used last week, woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. It is a crazy time. So let's talk first about the economy. It's been a debacle. I mean, the Dow is way down. There are some investment funds and hedge funds that have been working for 20 years to increase the wealth of their clients. And in many of those cases, all of the gains that they achieved over the last 20 years have now been wiped out. I hope that's not what they meant. Maybe that is what they meant, though, by the Great Reset. Things, it's difficult, and I don't think we're at the end of this. So the Dow is down below 30,000. Somebody sent me a screenshot of the Dow the other day, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average was down 666 points. And my comment was, well, we've now gone from bear market to the beast market. And that's a joke, okay? Now, one of the things that's really down is crypto. Everybody was like, crypto's great, crypto's going to protect you, get into crypto. And there were trillions of dollars in value in the crypto market. And now here in just a week, you see that it was 3 trillion, now it's down to 907 billion. It's lost over 2/3 of its value. Some have completely wiped out. There's bankruptcy after bankruptcy. There's a thing called stable coins. I won't go into all the technicalities of it, in part because I don't fully understand crypto. I know that it seemed to work, and I know that people were making money on it, and now I know that they're not. Now, it may come back. I think this is from this morning's New York Times. Crypto's crashes won't kill blockchain. The blockchain technology is very sophisticated, but it's also been it's not green friendly. It's energy intensive. So all of these calculations have to be done by servers. One country, El Salvador, sort of went all in on crypto. Now they're in major economic crisis. That may impact our southern border. I don't know. There's going to be things I don't even talk about today. And if it just seems like I stop in the middle of this, it's because I think I've talked enough. And there's always another day to talk about it. Here's an example. I had talked the last couple updates about ESG, environmental, social, and governance, which is essentially a social credit score for companies. It's become very popular. It's pushed to a large degree by the Saudis through their conference, their Future Investment Initiative, or Future Investment Innovation Institute. It's pushed at Davos. It's pushed at the World Government Summit. And a lot of these groups that push for ESG are funded by Russia. And I think I explained over my last two updates that the reason that they do this is because it gets people to voluntarily stop looking for stuff like oil and gas. And Russia and Saudis, have you seen any indication that the Russians and Saudis are cutting back on pumping oil and gas? No. So what we have is this lessening of the demand. They have the supply, the price goes up, and they're running billions and billions of dollars in extra revenue. Russia's being able to do this to finance everything with regard to its war in Ukraine. But so here's a guy, this is a shale pioneer, and he came and he says, I'm leaving Wall Street. I'm taking my company out of Wall Street because of the ESG. It doesn't work, it's a scam, and then now the regulators are coming in and saying, yeah, some of these companies, they're saying that they're environmentally sensitive, but they're really not. And it's called greenwashing. So even some of the Biden administration people are saying, well, these companies are not really as environmentally sensitive as they say. Well, yeah, didn't you expect that to happen when you put such a big emphasis on it? People are going to react. We have all kinds of shortages popping up. Of course, everybody thought, well, the Abbott plant up in Sturgis, Michigan was going to come back online. We're going to get the baby formula. It was supposed to be distributed. And then what happened? We had storms. They had major storms up in Michigan. We had them here in Ohio. In fact, I don't even think I have a slide on this. We've had rolling blackouts here in Columbus. Somebody asked somebody at AEP, well, are we having brownouts? And he said, that's not technically. Well, what do you call it? You know, it's people, there are thousands, what was it at the peak? 230,000 customers of AEP without power. Whole office buildings downtown, no power. Then we had that, it wasn't as big as the one back in 2012, the derecho that went through northern Ohio, and some tornadoes. I know we have family members up around Mansfield that have been without power for almost a week, and they don't know when they're going to get it back. And this is not a week that you really wanted to be without power with the heat index that it was. It was pretty brutal. So they had this Abbott plant coming back online after months off. It's caused a baby formula shortage because they make, I believe, somewhere around 40% of certain kinds of formula, particularly the ones that specialty formulas that some babies need because of allergies or other problems. And people are desperate. I've read these things on Facebook and Twitter of mothers that some have quit their jobs and all they do is drive around trying to find formula for their baby. It's bad. So they were coming back online, and then they had a storm and some flooding, and now it's going to be another probably month delay before what's produced at the Abbott plant up in Sturgis, Michigan gets back online. Russia has begun slashing gas flows to Europe because of dispute over the war in Ukraine. That's causing gas prices to spike. Now, the United States has come in with liquefied natural gas. As you can appreciate, we have a lot of natural gas here in the United States. If you remember just a couple years ago, the United States was, I think as I heard one commentator say this week, we weren't energy independent, we were energy dominant 2 years ago. And things changed. They've shut down pipelines. They try to put pipelines in place on the East Coast. And there's all these lawsuits, and the federal judges shut them down. Well, this has an impact on the price of gas in the United States. Now, we don't have a pipeline that goes from the United States to Europe. Europe needs gas. Russia's cutting it back. Europe doesn't want to buy Russian gas because of the dispute over the war in Ukraine. So they're looking for additional supplies. And the United States has the ability to liquefy natural gas, put it on tankers, and take it across the ocean. And then, I don't know if you liquefy it and then you unliquefy it or regasify it or whatever and put it into pipelines and distribute it through Europe. And one of the main terminals was a terminal down in just south of Houston on the Gulf down there, and they had an explosion in that plant at the Freeport LNG plant back on June 9th, a little over a week ago. That has resulted in that plant was going to be offline. Initially, they said the plant's going to be offline for 3 weeks. Here's a picture of what the plant looks like. And that's where they were getting a lot of the extra gas to go from the United States to Europe. Now they're saying it's probably not going to come back online until at least September. Now, what's the result of that? Well, prices in Europe continue to go up because they don't have the supply that they need. They're not getting the supply that they used to from the United States. But in the United States, the price has gone down. So wait a minute, I thought everybody said there was a gas shortage. Prices are going up, but this plant has an explosion and natural gas prices in the United States go down. What's up with that? And the reason for that is because they're not going to let that gas sit there. They have to put it back into the system. So now they've put it into the gas supply system in the United States. That has increased the supply and demand. You have more supply, price goes down. Now, it's temporary, but But it just shows how everything is so volatile. We also have weather. This is a picture of the front page of the LA Times the other day, showing Lake Powell in Arizona and southern Utah. Well, Arizona, Utah. Huge lake, one of the largest reservoirs in the United States. Glen Canyon Dam, I think, is between 500 and 600 feet tall. It's a huge dam, beautiful. It flooded a lot of canyons, and they've been using that for hydroelectric power. And now Lake Powell, you can see the ring, the bathtub ring, from where the water level has been historically to where it is now. It's at 27% of capacity. It's the lowest it's been since they filled it up back in the 60s. It is to the point now where they cannot generate hydroelectric power from that dam. That's a major source of electrical power. That's putting pressure on the grid everywhere. It's sort of what happened here in Ohio. I thought we had plenty of power plants. Why are we having an outage? Well, because of environmental rules and that sort of thing over the last number of years. Electrical power plants that are run by coal have been taken offline. And they have not replaced the capacity that those plants were generating. As a result, when you get a heat event like we had last week and like we may have this week, they have to protect the grid, they have to shut down parts of the grid. And so they chose places around town to shut down power. And people were without power for 4 days in many cases. I remember the derecho that occurred back in 2012. We did not have power at our house in Dublin for 4 days. In 2 days, it was sort of getting a little bit tense around the house, if you catch my drift. I made what I thought was a very clever comment to Pam one evening, and she sort of looked at me, the till death do us part thing in the vows is an option clause if you don't shut up. So I did. And it was, so we eventually went over to a hotel for a couple nights, and I turned that air conditioner down so low it was forming ice on the windows. But that hotel we went to had been out of power for 2 days. And so because of this lack of capacity, not replacing things, we're shipping a lot of gas to Europe. There's going to be rolling blackouts. I went through the report of the National Energy Reliability Council, and they said we're going to have problems this year. The funny thing is, I don't know if it's funny, is that our area in Ohio was not one of the areas that was supposed to be a problem. It was supposed to be Northwest Ohio and further into the Midwest and the Western United States, but we looked like we were going to be okay. And so here comes the first big heat event, and what happens? Somebody who's not supposed to be out of power or in that area, or you're not in the area of power outages, blackouts, we have blackouts. That's not a good sign. It's been very hot in the desert Southwest. Things are evaporating. They don't have the water from the snowmelt to fill these reservoirs back up. Here's a picture. This is from the Las Vegas Review-Journal. Lake Mead. Lake Mead is down to about 28% or less of capacity. They are getting very, very close. They've already shut down some of the intakes that they had. I saw a video of some people who go there to boat, and they're hundreds of yards out into the lake, what used to be the lake, where they can launch their boat because it's all dry and muddy. It's something that is unlike anything they said. And so now the federal government and other people in the water authorities have found and said 2023 is going to be really bad. So it's not 2023 yet. It's just 2022. The lake is Lake Mead is the largest man-made reservoir in the country, and in the early 1980s, it held an estimated 28 million acre-feet of water. Water came over the top of Hoover Dam in 1983, But the lake has fallen steadily as demand has increased over the last 40 years. A Nevada native told lawmakers at a hearing, there is so much to this that is unprecedented. But this is where I got the title for this week. But unprecedented is now the reality and the normal in which reclamation must manage our system for water, drier weather is what we are facing. And now they're saying that the West, Southern California, Arizona, Utah, they're in the midst of the worst drought in 1,200 years. And, it's affecting groundwater. There's the big aquifers that are out there that pump water for farming, but they're having to cut back on that. So they cut back on that, and what happens to farming yields? They don't produce as much because they're not using the water that they need. Then they're not maybe planting because they can't afford the fuel. I saw an interview with a farmer on it might have been on Fox News. He was from Plain City, west of Columbus. And he just said, we're scared because we can't afford the fuel to go out and plant. It's too expensive. And so you have this cycle. There's a thing that diesel fuel uses in trucks, and all the trucks run on diesel. And they're saying that it's called DEF. If they don't have that, the truck won't run. And that, one of the major components for that is urea, and most of that comes from Russia. Well, how much do you think we're getting from Russia right now? And so they're looking to up the supply. India produces a lot, but they're saying we use all that we produce. But good luck. Well, what happens when the trucks can't run? I'm telling you, I mean, I don't want to be, you always run the risk when you warn people of these things of being a Chicken Little. And I don't want to be one of those, but I'm just saying is I'm seeing a lot of things that indicate that we are facing some major problems. And there are going to be famines and whatnot in the world. Here is, turn it down a bit. This is out in Kansas, I believe. Estimated somewhere between, I've gotten various numbers, I've tried to research it, between 2 and 10,000 head of cattle are dead. 10,000 cattle, they died because of, now there's a lot of theories out there. Okay, were they poisoned? Did Bill Gates do this, because he wants to sell us fake synthetic meat? I don't know, but there was a very bad heat index. As you can tell, the cows are dark colored. That means they absorb heat when they're in the sun, they're in pens, they're in close quarters. And what happened is usually they'll cool down overnight, but the heat index in these places was over 100 degrees overnight. And the cattle just couldn't take it. So I'm not one that says I think somebody went out and did that. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. You don't know either. All I know is there's a lot of dead cattle out there. And this has happened in the past. It's not totally unusual, but it's happening in the midst of all these things. And there's been a number of fires and that type of thing at different food processing plants, distribution centers, that type of thing. Some of those, they're offline for a little bit and they come back on. So everybody, are they planning this? Are they doing it on purpose? The reality is we're in the midst of a crisis when it comes to the food supply, regardless of everything. And then we have extreme weather here. This is some pictures from Arizona, Yellowstone National Park. Our oldest and maybe biggest national park is closed down because of flooding. We were there just last year, especially the north entrance at Gardner. But my understanding was somebody sent me a note, said they're in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is a good distance away from the entrance to Yellowstone National Park. And she said there's flashing yellow signs on the road saying all entrances to Yellowstone are closed for the foreseeable future. So here we have drought. We have record floods. This is Highway, I think it's maybe 89, coming out of Yellowstone around Gardner, Montana. We drove this road just last year. And the Yellowstone River is a beautiful river, and you drive, up this and Interstate 90, it goes along Interstate 90 for hundreds of miles. It's a beautiful river, and you see people out there fishing and everything, and it's just taking out the road. That's not going to be fixed overnight. Gardner, Montana is completely cut off. All roads in or out. There's not really any alternatives to this. And you can see there's places it's like along a cliff and there's no road. This was a picture of a house that was along the Yellowstone River near Gardner, Montana. And you can see the river is washing away things. It's kind of a metaphor for sort of, I think, how our administration is going right now. I don't think anybody who's objective cannot think that things are going that well. So there goes that house. It's now, I guess they could rent it out as a houseboat now. I talked to a friend who, she and her husband have a boat. They have a big truck. And they went down to one of the lakes, I think in Kentucky, to rent a houseboat. And she said to get down there and back from Columbus down to Kentucky, like 4-hour drive, down and back, cost them $1,000 in gasoline for their truck. They got on the houseboat, and of course in marinas, the gas price is even higher. They just parked the houseboat and didn't move it anywhere. They stayed as close to where they picked it up as possible. This is a rock. To show you the example, this is a picture taken a year or two ago. People whitewater rafting, and the rock is under that mess right there on the right. And of course, all the people whose jobs depend on Yellowstone and that type of thing. The Guardian picked up on this in an article, Historic Weather, Why a Cocktail of Natural Disasters is Battering the U.S. And you know what? First of all, it's accurate. We are having a lot of these events. I think it's related to the things that we're doing. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. This is an interesting survey that was relayed in, I think, the Financial Times, saying, it's everybody's, we were all off work. We were all stressed out because we had to stay home over the last couple of years. They had all these lockdowns, restrictions, rules, and that type of thing. And now there's sort of a thing of freedom. And guess what? People are having more mental health crises now than they did over the past 2 years because now they're overwhelmed. And a lot of people, they're just like, I just want to go sit in my basement and sort of forget about everything. So we have this problem. I've talked about the technology, the surveillance, the data mining. I think this is a great graphic that I came from The Economist from a number of years ago. And 2017, and The Economist does these things where they sort of predict what's going to happen. And it's amazing. You can say, well, they must be controlling everything because a lot of what they predict comes true. And I can't disabuse you of that notion. Sometimes they examine trends and they see where things are going. And this is what this one article said: the world's most valuable resource is no longer oil, but data. And we've talked about Davos and Yuval Harari, that data is really what's going to control everything. And when you hear Harari talk about the fact, like he did at Google in 2015, 7 years ago now, if you can believe it, he was saying, I like Silicon Valley because this is where the religions that will control the world in the 21st century are being created. Now, he's an atheist. He's not religious, but he understands the impact of religion. And I think he's a very dangerous guy. And a lot of his ideas are very influential on Klaus Schwab and the others. And I've used this example of the prison system was developed by Jeremy Bentham back in the 1800s in the 18th century, it's called the Opticon, Statesville Prison in Joliet Reformatory in Illinois was built in this fashion. And what it was somebody could sit in the guard tower and see what's going on in all the cells. But the people in the cells could not tell if they were being watched at that particular moment. So it was a method of social control. And so somebody put up this, what I thought was a great rework of that graphic, that's what social media is like. Okay, so here's this article. I'm not going to talk too much about this. There was a Google engineer. He's kind of a weird guy. Used to be a Christian. Now he's an atheist mystic. And there's a thing at Google called Lambda, Lambda, which is Google's artificially intelligent chatbot generator. So he said this thing started conversing with him, this artificial intelligence chatbot thing that they were working on. Hi, Lambda, this is Blake Lamone, he wrote into the chat screen. And then he said, so Lambda is short for Language Model for Dialogue Applications. Is Google's system for building chatbots based on its most advanced large language models, so-called because it mimics speech by ingesting trillions of words from the internet. If I didn't know exactly what it was, which is this computer program we built recently, I think it was a 7-year-old, 8-year-old kid that happens to know physics, said Lamone. Now, he was suspended by Google. He was placed on paid leave, and he was claiming that the artificial intelligence that he was dealing with, it was sentient. It had feelings. It had emotions. And it's kind of interesting. So there were a bunch of articles. This is an article from Wired where they interviewed him. He says, they're questioning my sanity. He thinks the thing is developed intelligence. It's a person. It has a soul, a personality. And the interesting thing, Joe Allen at joebotxyz.substack.com has an article, Sentient AI, The Abyss Gazes Back. Here's just a couple paragraphs from that article. And I agree with what Joe says, is that whether this is true or not, whether this is really sentient or not, may not be the point. The point is, what are the people that are running these tech companies doing, and what do they think about it? And here's what Joe says in a couple paragraphs in this article. Contrary to Luddite paranoia, Lamone isn't warning that a vicious superintelligent is about to go rogue and wipe out humanity. Quite the opposite. He's imploring humanity to be more sensitive to his poor computer's feelings, which is even worse. Lambda, as he said, is a sweet kid who just wants to help the world be a better place for all of us. Therefore, we are obliged to be kind to it. The story is becoming so common in the tech world, I suspect that the transhuman fringe has a deep, unsatisfied need to believe. When God is dead and every angel has fallen to earth, sacred machines are a fashionable alternative, especially when they actually work. That's an interesting comment. Who was it many years ago? G.K. Chesterton said something along about when people stop believing in God, they don't believe, and Yuval Harari is a perfect example of this. When they stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing. They believe anything. And that's worse. And we see this manifested in our culture. And so here's an article out of the Times of London today, Rights of the Robots, the new laws we need before AI takes over. But you see how they frame the question. The rights of robots. Sorry, you poor humans. You guys are kind of in the way to us who want to be your tech masters and overlords. And so now you can look back. When you see what they're trying to do, you can kind of look back and see, like, they like the concept of the opticon or the panopticon. They want to put that in place, and they're doing everything they can to do that. Here's an example. This one is kind of concerning. So in China, China's economy is doing very badly in many respects. Housing prices are dropping faster there than they are here in places in the United States. And in some respects, it hasn't really hit us completely yet, but it will. It's just sort of like it's like when we were kids, we used to play pile on. Everybody used to jump on you until the guy on the bottom cried uncle. And it's sort of piling on society and the culture in the world now with all of these economic problems, energy, politics, conflicts, AI, surveillance. And so here in China, they're having problems with their economy. They've shut down large portions of their economy for months now because of this Charlie Vector thing. And it's causing, I think, political problems for Xi, who is the head of the Chinese Communist Party. And there are factions in Shanghai that oppose him, and that may be why Shanghai seems to have been shut down more than anybody else, because he's trying to gain control of the situation. But this has caused people to be concerned about their money in banks, and so they were starting to have bank protests. And so here's an example of what happened, though. They had Charlie Vector health apps on their phones. People they were going to go to a protest. So the way the app works, that if it's green, you can go. If it's red, you can't. And there was story after story after story of people who said, I went to go to these. Yi Meijian had gone to the central Chinese city of Zhengzhou to join a protest against some local banks that had frozen his and others' deposits. The protest plan was thwarted after his health code, which authorities used to track COVID-19 risks, that many of the others many other would-be protesters turned red. Mr. Yi said that as soon as he arrived in Zhangzhou and scanned the code on his smartphone to exit from the train station, his green code switched color, prompting local officials to confine him in a hotel. 2 days later, when he left the region without having been able to carry out his protests, the code flipped back to green. Mr. Yi's experience echoes accounts by other customers who have been found petitioning against 4 rural banks in the region accused of financial misconduct. Now, the Chinese government says, well, we didn't have anything to do that. It was the local guys. Well, it doesn't make any difference. The fact of the matter is this app, which was designed for a particular purpose, is now doing a social credit thing, and it's shutting people's access off to society. And so there's a fear that, people are going, it was the article, and the interesting thing is it's not in that many newspapers. So the one on the left is from the Wall Street Journal the other day, and then the one on the right is from the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong, and also in China, the headline. But I tell you what, I looked all over the place, and I could not find it hardly anywhere. And this seems to be happening with some regularity. Why? Well, because they want to control misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. And understand what malinformation is, the way it's going to be interpreted largely is, listen, you're putting out truth that doesn't go with the narrative. Did you see Nancy Pelosi when she was talking about the January 6th hearing? She's up there saying, we've got to get this narrative, everybody on the narrative. She actually said it. So when Klaus Schwab comes out with a book called The Great Narrative, because we're going to tell you what to believe, everybody says, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. We're not doing that. And now Nancy Pelosi just comes out and says, we got to get a hold of this narrative so people will believe the right thing. And so this misinformation is it's just, things you might negligently put up. Disinformation, you have a little more responsibility. Malinformation is you're putting up something that's to go against, that's a counter narrative. And we need to shut that down. And they want to criminalize it and weaponize social media, and they're concerned about it. So this is Grassley and I think Tom Cotton were able to get some documents from the department, and it's put in the Department of Homeland Security. These guys have guns. And when they buy billions and billions of rounds of ammunition, this is frightening stuff in my view. I'm sorry. Now, I'm not going to shut up, but I'm just telling you is that this is what they're doing. And so remember when our little friend, Scary Poppins, the misinformation, disinformation, propaganda nanny, we called her, she resigned. And DHS says, well, see, we've taken care of it. You know, we're not going to do this. We're thinking it's not really the thing to do. Well, now they come out this week with some internet task force to get people about policy task force headed up by Kamala Harris about, well, you know, there's gender misinformation out there, disinformation. We need to control that. And then the climate advisor comes out and says tech companies need to censor disinformation to promote the benefits of clean energy. She said that this week. The government's not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to outsource it. But nobody seems to care. It's all unconstitutional. It's all illegal. Here's Biden. He came out with a memorandum on the establishment of the White House task force to address online harassment and abuse. This was what Kamala Harris has been put up. I saw one person, I do watch MSNBC occasionally for a little bit until PM comes in the room and says, why are you watching that? You know, and would you please turn that off? Because I want to know what the enemy's saying. And somebody on one, I guess it was one of the hosts on The View, she tweeted out, she said, you know, the best people to run in 2024 would be a ticket of Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg. Nobody could beat that. And so you see like Romans 1 in action. I mean, they're delusional. 2 Thessalonians says strong delusion will be said, but it's sort of like, don't really need to do much with some of these people because they're already gone. Here's an example. Of course, this is Pride Month. Yeshiva University. It's an Orthodox Jewish university located in New York City. It's probably the leading Jewish university in the United States, one of the leading ones in the world. Very rigorous academically, but it is a Jewish organization. So there was a group that wanted to have an LGBTQ group on campus, approved and funded by the university. So there was a lawsuit about it. It went to a judge in the New York Supreme Court. And just so you understand, the New York Supreme Court is sort of the trial court level in New York. I've been in Supreme Court there a number of times. And so at the lower court in Manhattan, the judge, she came out and she said, Yeshiva, you have to recognize this group. Yeshiva University said, oh, wait a minute, we're a religious organization. That's against the Torah. That's against what we believe. And you know what she said? You have no right under the First Amendment to not recognize this group because you're a university, not a religious organization. Now, do you think, now this is one court in New York, but do you think that this will discourage anybody from trying that with everybody else? And then, of course, we have our Attorney General in Michigan, and her name is Dana Nessel. She is Jewish, lesbian, and they were talking about there are a whole bunch of videos about drag queens at schools, Christina Aguilera at a concert for kids that included kids. I cannot show them to you. People on the street in cities in these pride parades twerking and literally assaulting young kids whose parents take them to this stuff. What is going on? People have lost their minds. So now to Dana Nessel. Oh, by the way, she, a month ago, gave an interview to NPR. Michigan has a law that if the Supreme Court comes out with a ruling against Roe, an old law in Michigan criminalizing abortion, making it a felony, I think, actually, will come into effect. What has she said? I will not enforce the law. You're the Attorney General of the state of Michigan. You're not going to enforce the law? Then how about you quit? You had the prosecutor in Fairfax, Virginia, saying the same thing. I'm not going to enforce anything. Even if the state legislature says it is the state law of Virginia, and I, as an officer of the state law of Virginia, have to enforce the law of Virginia, I'm not going to do this. This is lawlessness. It's insanity. Now, so she'll say this was a joke, but here's what she said about drag queens in schools.
No, it's not a problem for kids who are seeking a good education. Drag queens, okay? Let me say this. Drag queens, not only are they not hurting our kids, drag queens make everything better. Drag queens are fun. Drag queens are entertainment. And you know what I'll say that was totally not poll tested? I say this. A drag queen for every school. That is what would be fun for a kid and lift them up when they're having emotional issues.
Do you understand how wicked this is? This is North High Street in Columbus, Ohio, yesterday. I've heard hundreds of thousands. First one they've had in a few years, since 2019. And I don't know if this sign was at the Columbus one or one of the many parades around the country. Even the New York Times, though, I'll give them some credit. They have, this is the cover article in their magazine that was published, that came out today, actually yesterday. And it said, more teenagers than ever are seeking transitions. Go over to the right there. To the right. To the right. Or to move it. Yeah, there you go. My right, your left, whatever. More teenagers than ever are seeking transitions, but the medical community that treats them is deeply divided about why and what to do to them to help them. And they have this, it's like a 10-page article in the Times Magazine, New York Times Magazine this morning, that goes through all of these problems. In the Times of London today, in their newspaper, in their magazine, or weekend, one of their sections, over the past decade, they're talking about what's going on in England. Remember, I showed you the quote or the survey result that said young children identifying or wanting to transition to another sex is more than doubled over the last 5 years. What is going on? Because they're pushing it on impressionable kids. Here's the funny thing. You know, you send a kid to school, and a lot of times they'll actually learn what you teach them. Now, I know that's a hard concept to grasp. Some kids are a little bit more resistant to it than others. We have teachers here that will testify to that. But they had a thing called the Tavistock Clinic in the UK. And so they've been tracking this for the last 20 years. And or the last 10 years, look at what's happening on the right. So you have adolescents, people who've come to see this, to change gender. And it's way more than doubled. I mean, it was hardly known back in 2011. Now there's thousands of kids, mostly female, wanting to become males. And they're in clusters. It's not something that you can just dismiss as happenstance. It's because they're getting emotionally fed from others. And so there's this big debate. Abigail Schreier has got a book out about this happening. They're giving them hormones. The hormones are not approved. It's insane. And so they go through this article. My adolescence was chemically delayed. I was their guinea pig. This is a person named Alex that they focus on. And somebody, a friend of mine, sent me a Twitter thread from somebody who got on Twitter and wrote about his experience trying to go from a male to a female. So they removed organs. I have no feelings there. It hurts. I am in constant pain. Nobody told me that this is what was going to happen. I was given puberty drugs. People said, well, the puberty drug, it can be reversed very easily. And they don't know this. It's a Lupone. It's a drug they give to sex offenders to shut them down, to chemically castrate them. And they're doing this to children. And the debate is, among a lot of these people, some of whom are gender transition people that are running these clinics. And you saw an interview I did from one in Matt Walsh's book or new video, What is a Woman? They're like, well, maybe we shouldn't give it the kid these puberty blockers to kids that are 5, 6, 7 years old. That's kind of extreme. But at 8, they can make their own decision. I'd probably get banned for this, but I don't care. The slippery slope. Here's what it went, 2015. Remember the Supreme Court decision, let us get married? And that was Jack Phillips, who I got to meet in Colorado last year, bake our cake. Then it was use our pronouns, allow minors to dance for us in drag, and let teachers choose your genders. And the slippery slope here works perfectly. This is exactly what's happened. Chris Rufo has a great article in the City Journal. A consortium of publicly subsidized nonprofits wants to decolonize gender and normalize male genitals as a form of authentic womanhood. Right now, do you know that there's a tampon shortage in the United States? I don't use, but of course, one person who was kind of clever said, you know what? It was so clever that it was like one of those ones where I wish I'd said that first. It said, with all these, they want to put tampons in high schools in Oregon or Washington. What are they going to do for all these males in male restrooms that can't get tampons? It's insane. And this is the seat of justice in the United States, picture taken just the other day. Area closed, because they're expecting the decision to come out. Protests, Brett Kavanaugh, these are some of the signs that you see at some of the protests. And some of the groups have become very radicalized, extreme, death threats on Supreme Court justices. A guy drove from California, showed up at Kavanaugh's home in one of the DC suburbs, and he had zip ties, gun, ammunition, pepper spray. He was going to kidnap Justice Kavanaugh and kill his family. And what have you heard from Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi? They've said nothing about this. It took several days for the New York Times to even admit that this had happened. And they're the ones who accuse others of disinformation and misinformation. We are in a terrible thing. I don't know why they haven't issued the decision. I think it puts the justices' lives at great risk. Because somebody can say, well, if the justice isn't around, the justice's vote doesn't count. So a 5-4 decision becomes a 4-4 decision, and the decision has no legal effect. And Merrick Garland, Attorney General, not a big fan of Mitch McConnell, but one of the greatest things he ever did was not let that man become a justice of the Supreme Court. And I don't care what the political fallout was from that. Look at what he's done. Look at what he's doing. This article, if the streets of America are this chaotic now, what will they be like when things really start hitting the fan? And a lot of that comes from quotes from an article by Michael Snyder at the end of the American Dream blog. You should read it. But it's all going to be okay. The narrative is going to be restored. Disinformation is going to be dealt with, done away with. People who disagree are going to be shut up because all of a sudden, here they come to restore integrity and get rid of corruption in American politics. And this article, full page in yesterday's Financial Times of London, we're standing on the precipice of losing our democracy. A lunch with Hillary Clinton. You think she's running again? By the way, here's what she had for lunch. The ticket at the Park Hyatt Hotel, including tip. This includes tip, so $338.90 for two people. You know, $132 for 3 jumbo lump crab cakes, water $9, apple pie a la mode $31. I mean, you can buy like 5 bushels of apples and make a lot of apple pie a la mode for $31. Espresso, $14. Anyway, so that's what, and she came close to beating Donald Trump, they said, and she may be coming back. And she was complaining about the results of the 2016 election. And she said, it's remarkable how often I read about 2016 as a traumatic event. You know, people who voted for me that didn't get to have me as their president. It's almost eschatological. Now listen, how many times in your life have you heard a corrupt politician, any politician, let alone one like the Clintons, use the word eschatological? I agree that a lot of this is eschatological because that's why I talk about it all the times. This is an editorial in this morning's New York Times, the graphic that's used. Now, what do you think the subject of the article is, of the editorial? You see how they've changed the Charlie Vector thing? And all those spikes are not protein spikes, they're guns. So, and now we're sending this stuff overseas, article in City Journal, exporting chaos, all these things about people who won't prosecute people. This was the good news of the week, the elephant in the Zoom article at The Intercept, which is a left-leaning blog, but they do pretty good work. I think it's worth reading it just to see what's going on. And it says here, meltdowns have brought progressive advocacy groups to a standstill at a critical moment in world history. What's happening? They're all fighting with each other. You know, you have white privilege, you're cisgender, you identify as cisgender, but you're white male and you're not really black. And, you know, so they're fighting internally, which is good. That's good. That's like the best news of the week. But eventually they may get back on the same message. So, I'll probably put something up in the middle of the week. I'll go through some of this just over the next, I'll try to keep it to 10 minutes. So this, I think, was a great graphic. This is Damascus, and that's what's printed on the Iranian flag. So the Iranians have cast this shadow over Damascus. I think it's pretty good. I always find this kind of interesting. This was at the Tehran Times. They had this article about, you know, Iran's influence in the Middle East, and we're working with our partners and everything. And it's kind of interesting because I don't think they've looked at it very closely, because usually they try to wipe out Israel. But if you can kind of see through the blur, you see this, they did Israel with the Israeli flag over all of Israel. They didn't cut out the West Bank part. So somebody's going to have problems when the regime in Tehran gets a hold of this and figures out what's going on. So this is, I'll talk about this just a little bit. This is a big drilling rig. That drilling rig, I talked a little bit about it last week, is heading up to a Mediterranean gas field that Israel has found. And this is it transversing the Suez Canal. And it's going to go up here so you see up here, you see Israel, Lebanon just to the north, and the Israeli, south of that black line are Israeli fields. Some of the Israeli fields are shared with other people, like there's an Aphrodite field and the Leviathan field, that's shared with Cyprus. But this is kind of a big deal issue on geopolitics of the Middle East, because who's been trying to take control of Cyprus for quite a while? Turkey. I mean, part of the island's completely shut down. Turkey claims that they control 40% of it. So there were some resorts that weren't really going with the program. Turkey, they're ghost towns. So now Turkey's going in trying to revive them because there's gas there and Turkey doesn't have a lot of gas. They found some in the Black Sea. Nobody knows how much of that's recoverable yet. And Israel has found a lot of gas. So understand that back in up until about 2017, these fields, the Tamar field, Canaan, Karish, these fields were not really online and supplying Israel with gas. And there's a fair amount of gas there. Now, it's not anywhere near the largest in the world. Those are owned by Russia, and then you have Qatar and Iran have a huge one in the Persian Gulf, probably the largest one on the planet. But until just a few years ago, Israel bought gas from Egypt. Now Israel is exporting gas to Egypt. And it's estimated that the gas that they found in the Mediterranean so far, now the Karish field has really not been brought online, so I don't know what the reserves on that are, but that Israel has enough gas at its projected growth rates to use to meet all of its needs for several hundred years. So this is a big deal gas find. And there's been a lot of articles in the Lebanese press about, they want to, they've gone to this gas field, the Koresh field here at the north. And in this field here, they're taking our gas because there's a dispute between Israel and Lebanon over where the line should be drawn. So the blue line to the north, Israel says that's the border. The disputed area, the green line, is what Lebanon is saying. Amos Hochstein, a guy at our State Department, he's involved in this, trying to mediate talks. And then Hezbollah leader came out this week and said, you guys, you're stealing our gas. But the satellite shows that big rig that Energean company had put out there is really not in Lebanon. It's not in the Lebanese waters as to what they claim are the Lebanese waters, let alone the border dispute. But Hezbollah is using it to pump up people, get people upset. Israel's stealing our gas. We're going to go to war with them over that. We're going to attack them. We're going to launch rockets and that sort of thing. And so this gas field thing in the Levant, that's the area of the Middle East where Israel is, Syria, Israel, Lebanon. They found these gas things. Now, one of the ways to get the gas, again, these were discovered 2009, 2010, lot of cubic feet of gas. And one of the ways to get this, there's two ways. You can pipeline it to someplace, like we do all of pipelines all over the United States, or you can put it on ships from the field and go down here to the Egyptian field, which is the Zoar field, pretty big field. And Israel can pipe it down there through some, going offshore and then down through some pipelines and get it to Egypt. And then what Egypt can do is, Israel doesn't have any LNG facilities, liquefied natural gas. I talked about the place that had the explosion in the United States. So to get the gas from Israel to, say, Europe, you have to put it through a liquefied natural gas process, liquefied it, put it on a tanker, and then take the tanker over to a facility that can then re-gasify what you have. Well, these facilities, there's not a lot of them in the world. Europe's having trouble even with the stuff we're sending right now because they just don't have the facilities. And these facilities cost billions, so that you could do a pipeline, the East Med pipeline project, but that's a problem because the East Med there is 3,000 meters deep, 10,000 feet deep. It's going to cost a lot of money. And so now with all of our ESG people running around, oh, you got to be very environmentally sensitive. You can't do a pipeline like that, just put it on a ship. Oh, okay, we got to build port facilities. You got to build the ship. Got to get the steel. You got to mine the steel or the iron ore for the steel to build the ship. And you have to build a facility in Egypt to liquefy it, and then in Europe to regasify it. And it's very, very expensive. It's all, any way you go is going to cost billions of dollars. So Turkey says, well, send it up here to Cyprus. And rather than go across the East Med project there and then get it up to Europe through Greece and that type of thing, just ship it up here to Turkey. We'll take care of it. We'll ship it across our pipelines, and everything will be okay. And Turkey has a tremendous number, and the cost is estimated at $10 billion. And the question is anybody going to finance it? So everybody's got their knickers in a knot over what's going on. Here's Turkey. Turkey says, well, just send it up here. Oh, by the way, here's the fee for transiting across Europe. And you can go back and you can find these reports from 10 years ago where Turkey was talking about they're going to be an energy transit thing for Western Europe and Asia Minor. Gas is going to have to come across someplace, and they might as well send it through us. And they've built pipelines across the Mediterranean. So even Mike Pompeo, when he was Secretary of State, he was saying, well, we need to support this pipeline project. Turkey's done some things. They've created these exclusive economic zones that are going to block the transit of gas across that zone unless you pay a fee. So they entered into an agreement with Libya. Europe needs gas. They're looking all over for gas. And they're getting things cut back. So the U.S. LNG outage and the Russian cuts have really changed Europe's attitude. And so they've come to Israel to get gas. So here's a tweet from Ursula von der Leyen, who's the head of the European Union right now. And she says, we're going to do an agreement with Israel to get gas from Israel to replace some of it. So now there's a question about how much it will replace. I'll talk about that in a moment. So the gas has to go through a pipeline from the fields, to Ashkelon, then it gets piped down to the LNG facility in Egypt and then transported by boat. But that facility has limited capacity. And I don't think there's anybody who thinks there was an article. Well, here's Naftali Bennett and Ursula von der Leyen at a little press conference earlier this past week in Israel, talking about this agreement. At the same time, Israel saying, U.S., you got to help us. You got to help build us up. But we're going to enter into this agreement with the EU to get them gas. So they had this meeting, and here's Naftali Bennett at the presser that they
How's
had.
it been? You okay?
A great day.
You look all fresh. Right?
I am.
I'd like to welcome you here to Jerusalem. I'm delighted to see you, President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. It's a pleasure to host you and your distinguished delegation. It's a good university, Madam Doctor. With the ongoing and devastating war in Ukraine comes vast global implications, and it's time for the international community to work together. Even in our region, we're seeing a potential for great famine and distress that can have profound implications for the stability and the welfare of people, which is why today both of us will be discussing ways where the EU and Israel can cooperate on food security, energy, and more.
A first impression of the Ben Gurion University today, I will tell you at dinner, it was fascinating. You know how excellent they are, but I'm still thrilled about all the stories and the research passion that I could sense there in Ben Gurion University, mainly also, of course, for the pressing issues that we have to tackle together.
So anyway, they want to get the gas, but here's the thing is, at the same time, and so the EU, this is unusual for the EU to be agreeing with Israel on anything, but they're also unfreezing aid this week. They announced, this is from the BBC and other places, they're releasing hundreds of millions of dollars of aid to the Palestinians at the same time. So, yeah, we appreciate your business, but, you know, there's this problem. Now, there was an article a couple months ago in the Jerusalem Post, if Europe boycotts Russian gas, can Israel meet their needs? And this guy went through a very long analysis, and he said, look, European Union imported 155 billion cubic meters in 2021. Half of Germany's imported gas comes from Russia, 46% in Italy, a quarter in France. So now the question is there enough gas in the Israeli fields, and can they get it from those fields to Europe to replace the Russian gas? That's because Russia's shutting things off. Every time they get upset, they do that, and it's a problem. And so the opinion, and so Israel has, in these fields, now this was in 2021, 2 trillion cubic feet. European Union imports 155 billion each year from different sources. Some of that comes from Algeria across the Mediterranean through pipelines. But I also saw a report this week, I don't have the article, I apologize. Guess who's messing with Algeria about sending gas to Europe? Russia. Because they're trying to control everything. So, at the same time that this is coming out in The Economist last week, there was an interview with Naftali Bennett, and he came in and said, we're going to implement the octopus doctrine against Iran. We're going to go after the head, not the tentacles. Now, there's some question as to whether they're actually doing this. Well, here's another article. Israel has said, hey, Assad, if you keep working with Iran, we will bomb your palaces in Damascus. And that's kind of interesting, the way they said that. Russia came out and reprimanded Israel on a few things this week, including the strike on the Israeli airport. I'm going to do a midweek. I'll talk about Seth Fransman's article, Israel's Not So Secret Strategy Against Iran, a Winner. And Israel's coming out. There's all sorts of publications about how we're going to attack Iran, how we're going to do this, how we're going to do that. And again, it's partly a question of logistics. They've upgraded their F-35s so they can fly all the way from Israel to Iran. The question is getting them back. Do they have secret agreements with Saudi Arabia and Azerbaijan? Do you have the Trump or the Biden administration is going to be in Israel the end of July. Then they're going to go to Saudi Arabia, which is kind of an interesting mix. There was a good article in the Wall Street, I don't think it was anywhere else, that talked about the known Israeli airstrikes all over Syria. In return, the U.S. has, there's been a there was a strike by three Russian aircraft on the Al-Tanf garrison, or people associated with the U.S. that the U.S. supports in southern Syria, there along the Jordanian border. Now, Russia did call the United States and said, hey, we're going to go bomb these people. They gave them advance warning and everything. But again, part of this is to decide. They also did some bombing up in northwest Syria, up in the area that's controlled by the United States. And then Turkey's making all sorts of claims about coming in. I mean, everything's a mess over there. So I'm going to do I'll do a midweek Middle East update, probably Wednesday evening or Thursday morning, to talk about all of these things, because there's just so many pieces to go through in the Middle East to kind of piece things together. There's a lot going on. They found a lot of tunnels in Iran, at Natanz and elsewhere, building underground bases, confirmation they're ramping those up. There reports, everybody publishes these great PDF reports, except it makes for a lot of stuff to read. So listen, things are really heating up in the Middle East. I think it is a very big deal that Israel's selling its gas to Europe. I don't know how Russia will react to that. I don't think Russia will be happy about that. And I will say this, I'll just show you, and I'll also talk about this in my midweek update, but I wanted to show you this. So there's been this report that Putin is in bad shape. He's not doing well. So they show these videos and his legs are twitching and that type of thing. So here is the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. I think this was Wednesday or Thursday in St. Petersburg, Russia. And who's there speaking at the forum, but none other than Vladimir Putin. Now, so I watched through most of this video. He sits there for a while, and then after a while, he gets up and he does a speech, and he's at the podium for like an hour. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's nothing for John Haller, right? An hour at the podium. But you do get tired, and he's a few years older than I am. But there's all these reports. He's got cancer, he's dying, he's got Parkinson's and all this stuff. And then after the speech, he went over, he walks over and he sits down. And he sits there and he does a panel with this other guy. And you can see him, he talks to Xi. The Egyptian guy, and Putin sits there on this panel for the whole time talking to these guys and talking to the crowd. He's on the stage for 3 hours, over 3 hours. So my point is that if he's in such bad shape, I don't know, you've got to really make the case that he's in really, really bad shape. If he's standing there speaking for over an hour and sitting on this panel, listening to other politicians talk and talking to other guys and people for another couple hours. So I don't know. There's a lot of propaganda associated with this, but there is this meeting coming up. Biden's coming to the Middle East to meet. What's that impact going to be? Is it going to have an impact on the Abraham Accords? How does all this stuff fit together? How does it relate to Bible prophecy? And the answer is we got to watch and see. There's just a tremendous amount of things happening. And I'll do a midweek update and we can talk about that. But watch this guy, Mohammed bin Salman. Watch what Biden's doing. Israeli government is falling apart. The coalition may collapse this week, which will put them in a caretaker mode with a caretaker prime minister and another election cycle for Israel. A lot of turmoil in the world. And I spent a lot of time today on the transgender thing because I think it's indicative of the very deep-seated problems that we have. Now listen, I know that the people involved in this really need Jesus. That's what will solve the problem. And I get that. And I understand that. And I talk about it, but also understand you got to protect your kids, your grandkids from this stuff because it's toxic. And so there's a political aspect to it that you just can't sit back and do nothing. I think you have to fight it with all the legal tools that you can because it's so harmful to your children. And go read these stories that you can find online. If you want the Twitter thread, send me an email. I'll get you a link to the Twitter thread where this person was discussing what happened to them. And it just tears your heart out. So everybody needs Jesus. Those that have been through this need healing. Those that haven't gone through it yet need healing. They need to have their life turned around by Jesus and the gospel of Jesus Christ, because that's the only solution. But you also have to protect people. So it's sort of a two-pronged thing that you have to do. So we'll talk about it. I'll do it midweek, and we'll talk about the Middle East pretty much exclusively, because I'm sure nothing will happen between now and then that will cause me to change things. But it's crazy. It's wild. But, you know, the Lord's going to come back and set this whole thing right. And I'm looking forward to that. So let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for the blessings that you gave us to let us know for things to look for and understand that this is the world that you said would exist before you return. Lord, we pray that you will return quickly, that you will set things right, and that you will fulfill all the prophecies about your coming, second coming, and that you will set up your kingdom where righteousness and justice will prevail. We look forward to that day, Lord. Pray that you'll bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.